You were never meant to stay. The words hang in the cold December air as snow drifts slowly between them, settling on the polished stone steps of the Caldwell estate in Aspen, Colorado, a place where everything looks perfect from a distance and nothing feels warm up close. Lily Harper stands there in a borrowed ivory coat that still smells faintly of expensive perfume, her breath visible in the thin mountain air, her fingers curled tightly around the small velvet ring box Ethan gave her 5 days ago, the one that was never supposed to mean anything. The mansion behind him glows with golden Christmas lights, 20-foot pine trees wrapped in white ribbon visible through the tall windows, laughter and clinking glasses spilling out every time the front door opens, but none of it reaches her. Ethan Caldwell, billionaire founder of Caldwell Innovations, stands a few feet away in a tailored charcoal overcoat, snow collecting on his dark hair as if even the weather refuses to choose sides. He does not look angry. He does not look cruel. He looks controlled, like a man calculating losses before they happen. And that is what makes it worse. 5 days earlier, Lily was just a temporary executive assistant working 60-hour weeks in a Manhattan high-rise, taking the subway from Queens every morning and budgeting her groceries down to the dollar, counting tips from her weekend shifts at a coffee shop to help her mother keep their small house from slipping into foreclosure right after Christmas. Ethan had called her into his glass office overlooking Fifth Avenue and said, without preamble, "I need you to pretend to be my wife for the holidays." No smile, no hesitation, just a contract slid across a sleek walnut desk and a velvet box placed beside it like punctuation. She had laughed at first, thinking it was some strange corporate test, but his expression never changed. His family expected him to arrive in Aspen with a fiancée. The board of directors was watching. His former fiancée, Victoria Langford, was circling again, backed by shareholders who believed merging families was better than merging ideas. If he showed up alone, it would be read as weakness. If he brought Lily, someone no one could control, it would buy him time. 5 days, he had said. You act the part. I'll handle the rest. When it's over, you walk away. With enough to fix your mother's mortgage. It should have felt like a transaction. Clean. Temporary. Safe. But nothing about standing in front of him now feels temporary. The snow keeps falling, soft and relentless. And for the first time since she signed that agreement, Lily realizes that somewhere between the staged engagement photos and the quiet moment they shared decorating a Christmas tree no one else cared about, the lines blurred. And when Ethan says again, quieter this time, "You were never meant to stay," she has to decide whether she was pretending all along, or whether he was. The snow keeps falling but neither of them moves, and Lily realizes that the silence between them feels heavier than the mountains surrounding the estate. 5 days earlier, when she first stepped off the small private jet onto the snow-dusted runway in Aspen, she had told herself this was temporary, just a performance measured in hours and polite smiles. Yet the moment she entered the Caldwell mansion and saw the 25-foot Christmas tree rising toward a ceiling trimmed in gold leaf, she understood that this family did not celebrate Christmas the way her mother did back in Queens with a 6-foot artificial tree and mismatched ornaments collected over 20 years. Here, everything was symmetrical, curated, expensive, and strangely cold. Ethan had briefed her in the car ride from the airport, his tone steady, outlining expectations like quarterly targets, explaining that his father, Charles Caldwell, believed marriage was strategy, not sentiment, and that the board of directors would be attending the annual Christmas Eve gala disguised as family friends. Lily had listened carefully, the velvet ring box heavy in her coat pocket, while thinking about the overdue mortgage notice folded in her purse, the one stamped in red ink that gave them until December 28th before penalties increased. She had signed the agreement in his office because the number on the final page could clear that debt in full, because she was tired of watching her mother pretend everything was fine, because sometimes survival looks like compromise. Yet when Ethan slid the simple platinum ring onto her finger for the first time in the dim light of the jet cabin, there had been a flicker in his eyes that did not feel like strategy. At the mansion, introductions began immediately, handshakes firm, smiles measured, questions subtle but sharp, and Lily quickly realized she was being evaluated not as a woman but as an asset. Victoria stood near the grand staircase in a deep red gown, poised and composed, her gaze lingering just a second too long on Lily's modest cream dress. The tension was polite, almost elegant, but unmistakable. Still, Lily did not shrink. She helped the house staff untangle garlands when no one else noticed. She spent an afternoon in the vast kitchen baking gingerbread from her grandmother's recipe, filling the sterile space with the smell of cinnamon and brown sugar, and for the first time the staff began to smile without caution. That night, Ethan found her alone in the library adjusting a crooked ornament she had hung on a smaller tree in the corner, one that had been forgotten in the decorating rush. He had watched her quietly before saying, almost surprised, "You do not have to try this hard." And she had answered softly, "I am not trying. This is just how Christmas feels to me." Something shifted then, subtle but real. The next morning, during a breakfast that felt more like a shareholder meeting, Charles questioned her background with thinly veiled skepticism, asking about her education, her family, her intentions. Lily met his gaze calmly and spoke about loyalty, about resilience, about building something that lasts instead of inheriting it. Ethan had remained silent, but his hand brushed hers under the table. A brief contact that felt less like performance and more like acknowledgement. Now, standing in the snow with the echo of his words between them, Lily understands that whatever began as a contract has grown roots neither of them prepared for. And the real question is not whether she was meant to stay, but whether he is brave enough to admit that he wants her to. The wind lifts a thin veil of snow between them, soft but unrelenting, and Lily feels the cold finally reach her skin beneath the borrowed coat as Ethan's words echo in the quiet mountain night. Inside the mansion, music begins to swell again as the front doors open for arriving guests, laughter rising in practiced waves. But out here, everything feels suspended, like the moment before a decision that cannot be undone. She studies his face carefully, the controlled expression, the careful distance he keeps even now, and she understands that this is not cruelty but fear dressed as composure. 5 days ago, when he first outlined the arrangement in that glass office in Manhattan, he had spoken about timing, optics, shareholder confidence, but he never mentioned the cost of letting someone see the parts of him that were not polished for the press. Over the past few days, she had watched him transform in subtle ways. The way his shoulders relaxed when she rearranged the dining table to feel less like a board meeting. The way he lingered in the kitchen doorway while she laughed with the staff over flour-dusted countertops. The way he stood a little closer when his father questioned her worth. Tonight's gala had been the final test. A ballroom filled with investors in tailored tuxedos and women in silk gowns. Crystal chandeliers reflecting light off marble floors. Cameras flashing softly for society pages. Victoria had made her entrance precisely at 8 o'clock, poised and deliberate, offering congratulations that felt more like strategy than sincerity. During dinner, Charles had raised a glass and spoken about legacy, about strong alliances, about tradition, and Lily felt every word land like a reminder that she was not part of their design. Yet when a board member casually suggested that Ethan's engagement seemed sudden, she answered before he could, speaking about decisive leadership and trusting instinct over fear, and the room had shifted, just slightly. Respect replacing skepticism. Ethan had looked at her then, not as an accessory, but as an equal. Later, beneath a balcony lined with white lights, he admitted that he had not planned for her to matter, that this was supposed to be efficient and temporary. And she had told him that Christmas has never been efficient, that it is messy and imperfect and worth the risk. Now, standing in the snow as music drifts through the open doors, Lily closes her fingers around the velvet box in her pocket and feels the weight of choice. She did not come here to fall in love with a billionaire, or to challenge a dynasty. She came to save her mother's home. But somewhere between gingerbread and quiet glances across crowded rooms, she began to hope for something real. Ethan's jaw tightens slightly as voices call his name from inside, the pressure returning like gravity, and she realizes that this is the moment he must decide whether she was simply a solution to a problem or the beginning of something he was never brave enough to want. The snow continues to fall, soft and steady, as she lifts her chin and waits, not for permission to stay, but for him to choose whether he is willing to step out of the warmth of power and into something uncertain and human beside her. For a long moment Ethan says nothing, and the silence feels louder than the orchestra playing inside the ballroom. Snow gathers on his shoulders, melting slowly against the dark wool of his coat, and Lily watches the calculation in his eyes shift into something far more vulnerable, something unguarded. From inside the house, she can see Charles Caldwell standing near the grand fireplace, surrounded by board members and family friends, his posture straight, his expression expectant, as if he already knows how this story is supposed to end. The front doors open again, and a burst of warm air carries fragments of conversation into the night. Words like stability, merger, future leadership drifting toward them. Ethan inhales slowly, the kind of steady breath he takes before stepping onto a stage or into a negotiation. But this time, there is no contract to hide behind. 5 days ago, he offered her terms measured in dollars and deadlines, believing that emotions could be contained the same way quarterly losses could be managed. But standing here now, he realizes that some risks are not financial. Lily feels the velvet box press against her palm, and she pulls it from her pocket, opening it just enough for the soft light from the mansion windows to catch the platinum band inside. It had looked convincing under crystal chandeliers, convincing enough to fool photographers and investors, convincing enough to quiet speculation. Yet in her hand it suddenly feels small, almost fragile. She steps closer, close enough that she can see the tension in his jaw, and she says quietly that she never wanted to be part of a performance that required him to silence himself. She did not sign up to replace one alliance with another or to serve as leverage in a power struggle. She signed because she believed he deserved one holiday where he did not have to pretend. Her words are not angry, they are steady, and that steadiness unsettles him more than accusation ever could. Inside, Charles lifts his glass again, calling for Ethan, the subtle summons of authority disguised as celebration. Victoria stands at his side, composed, certain that tradition will win. Ethan glances toward the doors, and then back at Lily. And for the first time since she met him, he looks uncertain, not as a chief executive but as a son. He admits in a low voice that if he walks back in there and declares this engagement false, he will satisfy the board and restore order. But if he tells them the truth, that it began as strategy and became something else entirely, he risks losing more than reputation. Lily closes the ring box gently and places it in his hand, not returning it, but entrusting it back to him, telling him that she will not stay out of obligation and she will not leave out of fear. The choice must be his, freely made, not negotiated. The music swells as the doors open wider, the golden light spilling across the snow like an invitation. Ethan looks down at the ring resting in his palm, then at the woman standing before him in a borrowed coat, yet carrying more courage than anyone inside that mansion, and something in his posture shifts, the rigid lines softening. Without another word, he reaches for her hand, not as a display but as a decision, and together they turn toward the warmth of the house, toward the room where power waits to see which version of him will walk through the door. The doors close behind them with a soft but unmistakable finality, sealing out the snow and sealing them into a room filled with expectation. The ballroom quiets almost immediately as Ethan and Lily step onto the polished marble floor, their hands still linked, not theatrically but firmly, and every conversation fades into a murmur that dissolves under the weight of anticipation. Charles Caldwell lowers his glass slowly, studying his son with a look that has shaped boardrooms and acquisitions for decades, and Victoria's confident smile tightens just enough to betray concern. The orchestra softens into a near whisper as Ethan guides Lily toward the center of the room, beneath a chandelier that casts light sharp enough to illuminate every hesitation. He does not release her hand. Instead, he clears his throat once, the sound steady, and addresses the room with the same composure that has secured billion-dollar contracts. But tonight his voice carries something less rehearsed and more human. He acknowledges that the engagement came unexpectedly, that timing raised questions, and that speculation has circulated. And then he pauses, long enough for doubt to flicker across the faces of investors who value certainty above all else. Lily feels her pulse in her fingertips, not from fear, but from the awareness that this moment will define more than a holiday. Ethan continues, explaining that what began as a strategic decision during a season of pressure evolved into something he did not anticipate, something that cannot be reduced to optics or leverage. He does not deny the contract. Instead, he admits it openly, stating that he asked Lily to stand beside him when he felt cornered by expectation. But he never expected her authenticity to challenge the very foundation of what he believed leadership meant. A ripple moves through the room, subtle but undeniable. Charles steps forward, his tone controlled as he questions whether personal sentiment should dictate corporate stability, reminding everyone that legacy demands discipline. Ethan listens respectfully, then responds without raising his voice, saying that true stability cannot be built on fear of perception, and that the strength of a company mirrors the integrity of the person leading it. He does not announce a resignation, and he does not issue a dramatic ultimatum. Instead, he states clearly that he will not dismiss Lily as a temporary solution, nor allow her to be reduced to a calculated move. He says that if the board believes his leadership depends on preserving appearances rather than honoring truth, then perhaps they misunderstand the kind of future he intends to build. Silence follows. Not hostile but contemplative. Lily feels the tension ease slightly in his grip, and she realizes he has made his choice without theatrics. Victoria steps back, composed but defeated, and Charles studies his son with an expression that shifts from authority to reluctant recognition. The orchestra resumes, tentative at first, then stronger, and conversations begin again, no longer sharp but curious. Ethan turns toward Lily, the ring still resting in his palm, and in front of everyone he asks if she is willing to stay not as part of an agreement, but as someone he wants beside him. There is no kneeling, no spectacle, only sincerity carried in a room that measures everything. Lily meets his gaze and sees no calculation left, only clarity, and when she nods, the warmth that fills the ballroom feels less like decoration and more like the beginning of something that was never meant to be temporary. The applause that follows is not thunderous, but it is real, and in a room accustomed to calculated reactions, that authenticity carries more weight than noise. Ethan feels the shift immediately, not in the volume but in the absence of resistance, as board members exchange measured glances that no longer question his stability but reconsider his resolve. Lily remains at his side, her hand steady in his, aware that acceptance in this world is rarely instant and never unconditional. Yet tonight, something fundamental has changed. Charles approaches them with deliberate steps, his expression composed, and for a brief second Lily wonders if another challenge is coming. But instead he studies Ethan with a gaze that holds both history and expectation. He speaks calmly about responsibility, about the burden of leading thousands of employees whose livelihoods depend on consistency, and Ethan listens without defensiveness, answering that consistency without integrity is fragile. He explains that innovation requires courage not only in technology, but in character, and that a company built on fear of public opinion will eventually lose its direction. The conversation is not confrontational, it is measured, almost reflective, and for the first time Charles does not interrupt. Around them the orchestra resumes a familiar holiday melody, and guests begin to circulate again. Yet the atmosphere feels altered, less rigid, as if the walls themselves have relaxed. Victoria offers a polite farewell, her composure intact, and though disappointment lingers in her eyes, there is no scene. Only the quiet understanding that the strategy she relied upon has dissolved. Later, as the evening progresses, several board members approach Ethan privately, expressing cautious respect for his transparency, acknowledging that markets respond to confidence grounded in clarity. Lily observes from a short distance, noticing that he does not step away from her when conversations turn strategic, instead introducing her without hesitation, not as a temporary presence, but as someone whose perspective he values. Near midnight the gala softens into smaller conversations, and the towering Christmas tree glows warmly against the tall windows. Ethan leads Lily toward the quieter side of the ballroom, where a smaller tree stands, the one she decorated earlier in the week with handmade ornaments from the staff. He takes the ring from his pocket once more, not presenting it as a spectacle but as a promise stripped of performance. He tells her that he does not expect her life to revolve around his empire, that he wants partnership, not decoration, and that if she chooses to build something with him it will be on equal ground. Lily thinks of her mother's modest living room in Queens, of the overdue notice folded in her purse, of the nights she counted every dollar, and she understands that staying will mean entering a world far larger than her own, but it will also mean reshaping it with him. She accepts the ring again, this time without the weight of a contract attached, and when he slides it onto her finger there is no applause, only the quiet certainty that this decision belongs to them. Outside, snow continues to fall over the Colorado mountains, and inside, beneath soft lights and the scent of pine, two people who began as a transaction stand at the threshold of something deliberately real. Morning arrives quietly over the Colorado mountains, sunlight spilling across fresh snow and reflecting against the tall windows of the Caldwell estate, turning everything gold and still. Lily wakes before the household stirs, the weight of the previous night settling into something steadier than excitement, something more deliberate. She stands at the window of the guest suite and watches staff move across the driveway below, clearing paths, restoring order, and she realizes that while the public moment has passed, the real work of building something lasting begins now. Downstairs, Ethan is already in the study, not in a tailored tuxedo, but in a simple navy sweater, reviewing emails from the board that arrived overnight. Headlines have begun circulating about his unexpected transparency, some praising his authenticity, others questioning whether emotion has influenced strategy. When Lily enters the room, he looks up immediately, not distracted, not divided, but present. He tells her that the board has requested a private meeting later that afternoon to clarify his intentions for the company's direction. It is not a threat, but it is not entirely support either. She listens carefully, understanding that leadership does not end with a single declaration in a ballroom. Over breakfast in the long dining room, Charles joins them, his tone no longer confrontational but reflective. He admits that public strength can take many forms, and while he still values tradition, he cannot ignore that the market often rewards leaders who stand by their convictions. Lily speaks honestly about responsibility, about the difference between pride and ego, about how stability grows from trust rather than performance. Charles studies her words, and for the first time, there is a quiet nod of acknowledgement rather than dismissal. Later that afternoon, Ethan attends the board meeting in a private conference room overlooking the mountains. Lily does not sit beside him at the table, but he requests that she remain nearby. Through the glass walls, she can see composed expressions and measured debate, hear faint tones of analysis and concern. Ethan outlines a vision for the company's future that emphasizes transparency, long-term innovation, and community investment rather than strategic alliances built solely for image. He makes it clear that his personal life will not be leveraged for negotiation, and that partnership in his private world will not compromise corporate discipline. The discussion is thorough, respectful, and after nearly 2 hours, several members express renewed confidence, not because he chose love over power, but because he demonstrated the courage to define both. When he steps out of the room, there is no dramatic announcement, only a quiet smile that tells Lily the path forward remains intact. That evening, as the estate grows calmer and guests depart, they walk together across the snow-covered grounds, the mountains stretching wide and open beyond them. There is no contract waiting, no countdown measured in days. Only the understanding that choosing each other will require the same steadiness they showed under chandeliers. Lily thinks of her mother's home in Queens and the relief that soon the foreclosure notice will no longer shadow their lives. Ethan speaks about visiting New York after the holidays, about seeing where she grew up, about learning the traditions that shaped her. The cold air feels crisp and honest, and for the first time since stepping into this world, Lily does not feel like an outsider invited temporarily, but like someone who helped reshape the definition of what power can look like. Above them, the sky begins to dim into soft winter blue, and in that quiet space between empire and home, they begin planning a future built not on obligation, but on intention. 2 days later, the private jet descends through a pale winter sky toward New York City, the skyline rising sharp and familiar beneath them, and Lily feels a quiet shift inside her as the Colorado mountains give way to the dense rhythm of home. Ethan sits beside her in a charcoal coat instead of a tailored suit, reviewing nothing, his laptop closed, his attention not divided by incoming messages for once. The board meeting in Aspen had stabilized his position, headlines had softened into cautious admiration, and analysts were already describing his transparency as a calculated display of modern leadership. Yet, Neither of them speaks about press coverage as the plane touches down at LaGuardia. Instead, Lily thinks about the narrow brick house in Queens with chipped white shutters and a small front porch where her mother still strings colored lights every December regardless of the electric bill. A week ago, she worried that those lights might go dark after the holidays. Now, as the car turns onto her street, she feels both relief and vulnerability. Ethan studies the modest neighborhood quietly, taking in parked sedans, children's bicycles left near sidewalks, wreaths hanging slightly crooked on front doors. He does not comment on the contrast. He only asks softly which house is hers. When they step out into the cold air, Lily notices neighbors peeking through curtains, curious but cautious, and she squeezes Ethan's hand briefly, aware that this world shaped her resilience just as boardrooms shaped his discipline. Her mother opens the door before they reach the steps, surprise flashing across her face at the sight of the man from business magazines standing on her porch, yet warmth replaces hesitation quickly. Introductions are simple and genuine. Inside, the living room smells faintly of pine and sugar cookies. The 6-foot artificial tree glowing in one corner with mismatched ornaments collected over decades. Ethan walks slowly around the room, not as a visitor evaluating space, but as someone absorbing history. Lily retrieves the folded foreclosure notice from a drawer and places it on the kitchen table. She does not dramatize it. She simply states that it will be resolved. Ethan transfers the funds that afternoon without ceremony, not as rescue, but as partnership, ensuring the mortgage is paid in full. Her mother's eyes well with quiet relief rather than spectacle. Later that evening they sit together on the worn sofa, mugs of hot chocolate warming their hands. And Lily realizes that this moment feels more defining than chandeliers and gala speeches. Ethan listens as her mother tells stories about Lily baking cookies at age 10, about working double shifts during hard winters, about learning that strength does not need applause. He admits that he is still learning how to separate responsibility from isolation, how to lead without building walls. The conversation is not grand, but it is honest. Outside, snow begins to fall lightly over Queens just as it did in Colorado, and Lily understands that the world she came from and the world he leads do not need to compete. They can coexist, reshaping each other. As the evening settles into comfortable quiet, Ethan looks around the small living room and says that this is what stability feels like, not marble floors or stock prices, but people choosing to stay. Lily leans back against him gently, aware that the journey from contract to commitment did not end in a ballroom, but in this simple house, where intention feels stronger than image and the future begins to look less like strategy and more like shared direction. Spring arrives in New York quietly, not with spectacle, but with small, steady signs of change. Crocuses pushing through thawing soil along the sidewalks in Queens and longer evenings that stretch golden across brick facades. And Lily stands on the front porch of her mother's house watching Ethan step out of a car that looks almost understated compared to the vehicles he usually travels in. 3 months have passed since Christmas in Colorado, and life has not become simpler, only clearer. Caldwell Innovations has announced a new initiative focused on long-term community investment, a decision analysts describe as bold but sustainable, and Ethan has spent as much time in neighborhood schools and small business roundtables as he has in boardrooms. Lily has returned to Manhattan, not as a temporary assistant, but as director of a foundation branch dedicated to housing stability, a position she earned not through symbolism but through capability. Tonight, however, there are no meetings and no press releases. There is only a small gathering in her mother's backyard where folding chairs are arranged beneath strings of warm white lights, where neighbors bring homemade pies and lemonade in glass pitchers, and where the air smells like fresh-cut grass instead of polished marble. Ethan greets each person without hurry, listening more than speaking, asking about families and work and the rhythm of the neighborhood. When Charles arrives unexpectedly, stepping carefully over uneven paving stones in a tailored suit that looks slightly out of place against picnic tables, there is a brief pause in conversation, but he offers a measured nod to Lily's mother and admits that this setting feels unfamiliar, yet grounding. As twilight settles, Ethan takes Lily's hand and leads her toward the center of the yard, not toward a stage but toward the worn wooden steps where she once sat after long shifts. Counting tips in her lap, he speaks without a microphone, his voice steady but unembellished, acknowledging that what began as a practical solution evolved into a partnership that reshaped how he understands leadership, family, and courage. He admits that standing in a ballroom declaring truth felt significant, but standing here, where resilience was first learned, feels defining. From his pocket he removes the original velvet ring box, the one that once represented obligation, and opens it, briefly to reveal the platinum band before closing it and setting it gently on a small table beside them. Then he takes out a second box, simpler, chosen together weeks ago, and tells Lily that this ring is not about strategy, not about image, but about choosing each other daily in whatever rooms they enter. There is no dramatic pause, only quiet anticipation as he asks her to marry him not because circumstances required it, but because love, tested and proven, has earned it. Lily feels the weight of every moment that led here, from snow-covered steps in Aspen to foreclosure notices folded in drawers, and she answers without hesitation. Applause rises from neighbors and family, not polished but heartfelt. Charles steps forward and extends his hand to Lily, not as approval granted but as respect acknowledged. As the evening deepens and music from a small speaker drifts softly through the yard, Lily realizes that the journey from contract to commitment was never about escaping one world for another, but about blending them into something stronger. Under strings of lights and a sky turning deep blue, she understands that power can be redefined, that legacy can expand, and that home is not determined by square footage or stock value, but by the courage to stay when staying is no longer required.